And I was interested in how that mediation process was carried out, so particularly the Jewish intermediaries who were present and the Mossadabs who were also present but not named as much. And I remember writing up that chapter, and I tried to summarize the debates, the way people had discussed translation, the translation activity, and the way it should be carried out. And at the time, I remarked that, well, you know, the debates here are actually between the translators of science who had been trained by the church and the people in power within the church. And they're negotiating between themselves what to do with this potentially disruptive influence of empirical science, of Aristotle. And it never occurred to me at the time, well, it did, but I was worried about it, that the other side, that the authors and transmitters of the text in Arabic, were just not present. They were not present in the translation process. They were not present in the debates about the translation process. The conflict, the negotiation, according to my model at the time, was between translators of science and the people who wanted to maintain the institutional integrity of the church. And they did manage to negotiate, and the church, the Abbot of Cluny, in particular, financed the translations of proto-science from Arabic into Latin to the better good of the 12th century. Now, at the time I couldn't see it, but if I go back to that now, suddenly I can start to explain what was happening. That it wasn't Arabic, Latin, the two cultures that I thought should be there. I was trying to see that object with a traditional model of translation, and the object itself was screaming at me and saying, it doesn't work. In the 12th century, it doesn't work. Now I go back and I see one system, the system of people believing in empirical science, testing things about the world, Aristotle, including all the transmitters, from Greek through Syriac, through Averroes, through the translators of science in Spain, negotiating with this other system, which is the organized control of faith. And I now see these two competing modes coming into contact. I wanted to study Islam versus Christianity for reasons that are obvious if you live around the Mediterranean, as I do. But what I discovered were two modes of enculturation that were coming together and interacting with each other with considerable tension, but also with the actual financing and carrying out of translations. The church wanted to absorb that knowledge. The translators of science wanted to extend that knowledge. And those two modes of enculturation managed to work together for the production of considerable knowledge in Latin and then in Romance. I've been thinking along those terms, along those lines, about what enculturation means and what it could mean for other cultural systems. And I start to see it in many places in our histories of translation. Not everywhere, I must add. One particular project that I've been working on with doctoral students in this past year has been something entirely different. The translation of Haji Baba, a picaresque novel written in English at the beginning of the 19th century about a character in Persia who, in true picaresque fashion, parodies the entire hierarchy of Persian society, of the despotic regime of the time. And I was interested, we've been studying how that English novel was translated into Persian and what the society criticized and made of it. And we've discovered that, in fact, it's not just these two cultures. The British imperialist critique of despotic, anti-modernist Qajar Persia. In fact, the original author had been born in Turkey. I'm glad they're working there. In what is now Turkey, had traveled, had worked in Persia, was writing as a relative insider of the Middle East. His father was Swiss. His mother was Jewish. The intermediaries, the original translators into Persian, were exiled discontents from the Qajar regime, who completed that work in Constantinople, now Istanbul, working from the French translation, and that translation was corrected by a British major working in Kolkata, to make some connection here, who duly corrected the Persian translation to make it concord with the original English, but left in significant critiques of the Persian regime which had been added by the translators. That is, the translators were pretending to translate, but quite large passages are in fact added as their own critique of the regime. In a presentation on that study, I actually have a map where I have London over here and I have Tehran over here, and then all this activity happening in the middle. The translation activity is not just these two sides, a relationship between these two languages and these two cultures. It is a very complex transfer carried out by many hybrid, double-faced, intercultural figures operating between the two. Our reason and our interest in studying that particular case this year is, I'm discussing with my students, we're looking at what's happening at what is called the Arab Spring. We are discussing how did that knowledge get into these cultures? How do people get the aspiration to political democracy, to what we would in political terms call modernity? And I have colleagues who say, oh, it's the CIA who've been pumping them up, or it's bad American culture, or the ideas have come in or been managed from Western powers. And yet, the study of cases like this Haji Baba picaresque novel, or like enculturation in these wider terms, suggests that it's never an easy affair of just A and B, one culture or the other. That the aspiration to modernity in that particular case has happened through many diverse routes and over a long time, and incorporating people who would otherwise appear to be disinterested in it. Why would a British Army major happen to leave in critiques of the people he worked with? He had been a particular supporter of the Persian regime in his 2 years as a consul in the country. But I don't really go into that particular case study. It'll take me too far off the track. We can come to it later, though, if there's interest in it, because it's a fascinating case. I'm starting to see enculturation as a model that can help me in many aspects of my work. But I'm also starting to see it in the most peculiar of places, in the ideational systems or ideologies that are so transparent that we're not aware they're there. I see it in the role of our educational systems in Europe, where translation studies is fundamentally there to train the translators that our societies need for their governments. It's not so true in the United States, where you have other more academic concerns perhaps, but we have strong vocational needs in translation studies in Europe. Where we have a quite developed academic system engaged in training translators, thereby legitimizing translations and certain modes of translation. And trying to make sure in the Bologna process, as it's called, that the translators we have also have humanist baggage, that they have a strong humanistic background to know what they're doing and why they're doing it in the world. Not just a merely narrow vocational commercial motivation. And that is within a system that we might call liberal humanism, enshrined in doctrines such as the Bologna process for higher education in Europe, that we don't even think about as spreading although the success of translation studies has been itself a case of inculturation, entering into educational systems all over the world, just as indeed the Western university system has. Within translation studies at the moment, we have a debate about non-Western translation studies, the need to get in ideas from beyond the West. And really what I find when I look at that is old Western opposed to new Western. That people with so-called progressive ideas in translation studies want to find them in other cultures and present this in the guise of incorporating the other. Whatever the case, the actual process is one, surely, of inculturation. It's not the encounter with a cultural other, it's bringing the cultural other within the system of translation studies itself. Now, when I look at the church and its interest, the Christian interest in translations, Christianity in its Catholic versions as a religion of mediation. Translation is what you do, basically. You share those aims that we have in the European educational system. You are legitimizing, you're training translators, you're legitimizing translations, and you are bringing education and humanistic culture to many parts of the world. For me, on paper, there should be ample scope for our two processes of enculturation to overlap and cooperate with each other. Particularly since in the history of missionary activities, Christianity has been accepted in many parts of the world as an instrument of political and educational modernity. And I pursue this idealistic cooperation between Bible translation activities and our training activities within the European system. And I look with interest at the American system to see what it's doing, basically within cultural studies and comparative literature, and that's one of the reasons I'm here to learn from you, to tell you the truth. However, I have problems, not remarkably enough, not with the Bible translators, not with the cultural other. I have problems within what's my own ideology, with this own apparently simple, neutral, who could be upset notion of liberal humanism. On June the 7th, 2002, I received a phone call from Mona Baker, at that time and still editor and proprietor of St. Jerome Publishing, which is not a religious institution, I hasten to add. St. Jerome simply because he was a patron of translation, in which she told me that she was inviting 2 Israeli members of the journal we were working on and the translation studies abstracts that we were working on to resign as part of a cultural boycott. And I'd worked with Mona for some 10 years prior to that, engaged in St. Jerome Publishing as an editor and a writer, and I published 2 books there, and in the journal. And I said, sorry, Mona, I can't support you on this one. And she said, is it because Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East? I said, no, what do I know? No, it's not about Israel at all. It's about us. You know, I work with these people. These are good academics. I work with these people all the time. I said, look, no, it's not that at all, and I can't explain it now. I'll write about it. And she said, be careful, and that was our last conversation. And I have written on it since, and I am careful. I'm trying to be careful quite now. Quite careful right now. It seemed strange that just in the middle of a phone call, something upset me, but I couldn't put it into words. Something upset me about working with academics across different cultures and then being asked not to work with them, for whatever reason. And in a series of publications, of reflections, it seemed to me that I, idealistically and naively, no doubt, I was working within a liberal humanism that had no national boundaries. I'd always been upset working with St. Jerome Publishing that each author has a country after it. Anthony Pym, Spain. What? I just happened to get a salary in Spain. There's nothing particularly Spanish about me or my training or whatever I do. The system in which I thought I was working, that liberal humanism, wasn't concerned with nation states. It was about the production of knowledge for everyone, by everyone who's able to contribute to this process. Not particularly about the commercialization of knowledge either. And that upset me on the spur of the moment, and it still upsets me. It still upsets me now because I think I'm still motivated by what I found in those translators' societies in the 12th century, by the desire to gain, produce, and spread knowledge with its consequences, which I think are beneficial to all. And that ideology doesn't recognize national boundaries. And whatever debates there are, I also happen to share Mona Baker's concerns with Palestine and Israel. Ideologically, we would be right on track, but that's irrelevant to this system in which I thought I was working. I'm still upset by that now, because the one system I thought I had clear, the one process of enculturation that I thought I would support and work for, is the one that isn't there anymore. The carpet has been pulled away from under my feet, and perhaps yours too. Now, ideally, our meeting here between our three communities would be symbolized in a new journal edited by Siri Nergard called Translation, a new interdisciplinary journal published by St. Jerome in Manchester and Edizioni di Storia e Letteratura in Rome. Ideally, that would be the kind of work that could be done, especially, I must add, with making European translation studies open to the wider cultural questions that Americans seem to be dealing with extremely well. But I can't support that. I can't support it because that one element that St. Jerome Publishing is upsetting the liberal humanism that I thought I was working within. I'm quite happy for everybody else to support it, but the names of the professors there are awe-inspiring. Appadurai, Apaya, Apta, Arrojo, that's only the A's. Basnet, Barber, Brodsky, Chambers, Chong, Damrosch, Hermans, Jones, Levine, Raphael, Saraf, Spivak, Tamez, Timosko, Venuti, De Vries, Wilson, and Young. I must be in a radical minority here. Do you really want to legitimize a nationalized mode of humanism, a nationalized translation studies? Or is that somehow irrelevant to what's going on here and to our modes of enculturation within translation studies? As an act of enculturation, the academic legitimization of St. Jerome Publishing, for me personally, radically transforms the humanist principles whereby scholars communicate directly with scholars, no matter what the iniquities of the states concerned, whereby knowledge is freely available to all, and whereby the merits of the individual thinker are recognized and respected, protected from both plagiarism and its opposite, boycott. This act of legitimization transforms the very principles upon which Renaissance humanism, and I go back to the 12th century in my own personal genealogy, upon which that humanism was built, and the secular university system, borrowing from the Islamic madrasas and slowly separating from church education, has helped extend waves of political modernity across the globe. I think that that model of a boycott is being allowed to subvert our traditional secular identity. And I'm appalled that people can't see that happening. Surprised and personally appalled. In sum, the model of enculturation might apply equally well to human liberalism, liberal humanism, in my own conception, and to Christianity and its missionary activities. In both cases, part of the self is nominally prepared to be changed. In both cases, however, there's also a part that remains non-negotiable and requires respect. And for me, in this proposal for a place of coming together and shared enculturation, that part, that non-negotiable part, has been reached. Thank you for your attendance. And